I'm Tom.
We are VIMTV, Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. Yeah, we are. I think so.
Okay.
Tom, a couple years ago, we had a really good request. A request that changed my outlook on music because I loved this album so much. Somebody requested the 2008 album from the band The Dodos called Visitor, spelled with an ER instead of an OR, because that's how the kid spelled it in the drawing for the album cover. And it just, like, the Dodos they at the time were a two-piece project. They had, you know, a guy playing acoustic guitar and a guy playing drums. They both provide really, really passionate vocals. It's upbeat, it's full of energy, bombastic drums, really a lot of rhythm, just infusing, well, you know, and this sounds crazy, but they're taking a lot of concepts that you hear in metal music, applying it to, like, acoustic indie rock and folk music, and then shoving it into this rock format. It's just this cool amalgamation. It's a very unique sound, and if you've heard me say, if you watch this show very often, you know that I am just all about originality. If you can make your music in the late 2000s and in 2013 now, if you can make your music sound original, you're probably going to get my favor. So, I've been into the Dodos ever since we reviewed that back in, what was it, 2010, 2011. They came out with Time to Die in 2009, an album I've listened to only a couple times, but then they came out with No Color, which was a 9-track, very expansive album in 2011. We saw lots of longer track lengths, really a bigger focus on just complexity in their instrumentation, lots of focus on just rhythmic builds, chaotic choruses that were just loud in general, and then a production style that was unlike anything you had heard before. Less lo-fi, more just bare bone, very crisp production. It sounded kind of grating on your ears. Now we have Carrier, the 2013 follow-up. Carrier is an album of a different color. Truly, where the last album was no color, this album is full of color. And I think that the reason is because there's just, right from the get-go, a strong sense of emotion in the instrumentation, and in the vocals, and in the lyrics. Part of this is because the band, one of their friends and touring guitarist passed away, and it affected the band as you would expect it would, and then that was reflected through some of the songwriting. Tom, what was your take on Carrier? Did you notice some differences in sound and how they approach songwriting?
I did notice some difference in sound. You know, you mentioned their past work being a lot about rhythm, and you do have some interesting rhythms here. They still play around a lot with time signatures and kind of polyrhythmic devices. You hear a lot of tracks in here.
I think that's just part of their DNA.
Exactly. You know, a lot of songs in here, iterations of like 11 beats or 7, you know, or 5.
I can just imagine you counting them all out.
Oh yeah, I do. That's what I sit at work and do. I'm like, oh, what time signature is this in? But what's different about that in comparison to how they did it on their past work is that they don't just try to force it down your throat when they do that. It's still, they focus more on melody within those odd rhythms rather than really accenting where those off rhythms come into play. So you kind of have to figure it out for yourself. And it's interesting because I can't really tell if that was a conscious choice, if they wanted it to sound more smooth, or if they've just gotten better at it. It also depends on if the past, whether they've been doing that deliberately and making it stick out, or if it's just they were forcing it a little bit and that's what happened. But it doesn't really matter. That's just how Carrier ends up coming across. Now, this was an album that was actually a little hard for me to get into at first. Every time I listened to it, and I listened to the crap out of this album, but the first 2 or 3 times I listened to it, I came out of it always enjoying it, but nothing ever really stuck with me. And I think that was for a few reasons. First off, these guys are not about hooks. No. These guys are not about catchy vocal melodies. I think their vocal melodies are good, but because of that, it's going to take a lot more listens to really understand them and for them to really stick in your mind and make an impact on you.
They definitely don't structure their songs when they lay out and are writing their songs. They don't structure it in a way that highlights some hook that's going to get stuck in your head. They never do that.
Also, with 11 tracks, I think that a lot of these tracks sound somewhat similar. I wouldn't say they necessarily repeat themselves, but a lot of them stay around the same general intensity level. There is some contrast. You've got a shorter track in track 6, Hot Holidays, 1.5 minutes, a little bit softer. The last couple tracks are a little bit softer, which is why those stuck out to me. But there were several tracks on here that while I enjoyed them, I just felt like they accomplished very similar things. Now, why this wasn't as much of a problem in the past with the past works of theirs I've listened to, let's look at the albums of theirs that we reviewed. We reviewed Visitor, and the way that album is structured is there are more tracks, and there's a lot of contrast between the track, well, not just dynamics, but between the track lengths. Right. You have these 7.5-minute sprawling tracks, and then a 1.5-minute track, and then another 6-minute track.
So you get an infusion of tons of ideas.
Exactly, and then No Color is the complete opposite extreme, where there's less tracks. There's only 9, but they're pretty expansive, as you said. There's a lot more dynamic contrast, and there's a little bit more to dig your teeth into. Here, things are kind of kept in the middle as far as track length.
3.5 minutes on average.
Yeah, pretty standard, but there's more tracks. So because of that, they blend a little bit better, and it makes for a very smooth listen, but it also makes it a little bit more difficult to really attach to or dig into any one part of it. It at least takes more listens.
It definitely takes several listens, and I listened to this a number of times. I found that several tracks did stick out to me, though, right away, and it was those tracks that really cemented, as I explored those tracks and what they were doing to make me get so sucked into those tracks. Because Dodos, historically for me, have been a band that I've had to listen to their albums several times before I like them, and here these tracks were sticking out, and that's unlike any experience I've had with Dodos before. Transformer, the first track on the album, is melody-based. There's a lot of really dynamic, just the way that those guitar melodies are written. It's addictive. It just sinks into your ears, and you just want more of it. And I think that there you see some really emotive vocals. The lyric, "What does a song hold? What is love?" That in the way that that is sung just gives me shivers thinking about it. And then also in track 5, Relief, which I don't think is one of the best Dodo songs I've ever heard, but man, when the heavier part busts in on that song, there are some killer guitar melodies that just stick with you. And I think that that's something that we really haven't heard the Dodos do, or at least put in the forefront of their sound. Now, there is some songs on here that focus more on rhythm than they do melody, but I think that we are seeing a shift in how the Dodos wrote their music for Carrier. You're seeing more focus and emphasis on creation of guitar melodies and even vocal melodies at times, and less emphasis on just building based around rhythmic instrumentation. And that is a new direction for this band, and I agree with most of the things you said. I felt like this album kind of sagged in the middle with tracks 6 through 8. I did feel like tracks 8, 9, 10, and 11, you felt like you had multiple closing tracks there. It's hard from an album perspective. I think that when you are presenting a listening experience and you're tricking the listener into thinking that you have multiple closing tracks, I don't think that that's ever a good strategy, personally. So I don't think that this album really works that well as an album. It's more of a compilation, and that, I give it a ding for that. I want it to feel like an album when I listen to it. That's just what we do. We review albums, not compilations, not songs. We review the collective work as one piece of art. And there's some really positive qualities. There's a lot of really good tracks on this album, but as an album, it did take a ding. Now, overall, I really like this. One other comment that I wanted is I felt like on some of the tracks, the vocals weren't quite as on as they needed to be. They just felt a little off-key.
That's fair.
So that brings me to about a 79.
I'm going to go even 80.
So 80 from us. That's still a really good album. In fact, I would even classify this as a must-listen.
Yeah.
We're big Dodos fans here. This album is actually being rated a little bit lower than what we just gave it. So we're big Dodos fans, and if you guys like the Dodos and have listened to Carrier, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the album. So leave us a comment at www.velocitiesandmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesandmusic. As always, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and let us know what albums from 2013 you'd like to see Tom and I review. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.